This book is called The Founder's Day Dance, and it starts, of course, with a statement by Jerry's father. So it says, I saw my chance at the jail and hit him. It took him by surprise, but he came back after me swinging, but he only hit me once, and I beat him up pretty bad. He tried to grab his gun, but I always made sure he never drew it, for I kept hitting him in the face, kicking him in the groin, and I bounced his head off the bars and pushed his head through the window, and I hit him so hard that I drove his head into the plaster. He didn't have a chance after that, and I kept reminding myself I was going to kill the first cop that ever tried arresting me. I finally got his gun away from him, and I told him I would kill him if he didn't drive me out of town. But I knew I was, and the thought made me feel really good inside. I made him drive me through a couple of towns, and him still begging for his life. I told him I wouldn't, but I knew I was, and could hardly wait to kill him. So that is a statement from him on death row. Now I'm going to start with the actual book. Chapter 1. What the fuck are you doing in my car? The voice, it didn't fit the speaker. She was petite, pretty, refined. A moment earlier, Andy Beale had been startled by the tone of Craig Miller's voice. Now he was shocked. It was a strange ending to the Founder's Day dance. Midnight had come and gone. The dance was over, and the orchestra had gone home. As they walked away from the Carousel restaurant toward their car in the Arden Fair parking lot, it's a big old mall. Andy and his date saw Craig and Mary Beth. Craig and Mary Beth would have been hard to miss. They were sitting in the back of a silver-blue Oldsmobile, which almost was new. The dome light was shining above them, and Andy wondered what they were doing in a car like that. They were all just college kids who drove old wrecks, aging Honda Civics or VWs or ancient Chevrolets, which were held together with twine and baling wire. The Olds was classy transportation. Just a few minutes earlier, Craig had suggested to Andy they all go to this place, his place actually, to continue the party. But Andy had to turn the thumbs down to the idea. His neighbors would not appreciate the sounds of a college party in the wee hours of the morning. So Andy decided to play a joke, just a little prank which would give them all a laugh. He speeded his place. Moving ahead of his date, climbed in the open door of the Oldsmobile and sat down behind the steering wheel. Not until he was all the way in the car did Andy see the man sitting in the passenger seat beside him, an older man, not ominous, threatening, nor particularly angry or surprised looking. Andy glanced back at Craig. His friend's face was tight, drawn, and serious. You don't belong in this car, Andy, Craig said. His voice was steady, calm, and determined. Andy climbed back out of the car. The joke suddenly wasn't funny anymore. Before he had a chance to take a step, he was confronted by a petite blonde and asked the rude question. Stunned by the words and the savage way they were delivered, Andy began to apologize. What's the big deal? He asked. I didn't mean to upset you. I'm sorry if I offended. The blonde was barely 5 feet tall and slender to the point of being skinny. She might have weighed like 90 pounds. When her roundhouse right, a stinging slap, landed on the cheek of the 6'4" 225-pound Andy Beale, she was standing on her tiptoes. Andy's face flushed. Andy was young, flustered, and embarrassed. Bitch, he muttered as he moved away. Whatever, the blonde replied, pushing past Andy to her place behind the steering wheel. He walked a few feet to where his date was sitting and turned in time to see the blonde drive the silver-blue Oldsmobile out of the lot. There's something awfully wrong here, Andy said to his date as he watched the car move away, his eyes focusing automatically on the license plate. And for chapter 2, we begin with this. So, Charlene was worried. Experience had taught her what would happen next. So, she moved automatically, taking orders from Gerald the way she had in all of her other nightmares. But this time, the fear she had managed last 2 years surfaced. These were not ordinary people, she told herself. Not at all like the girls in the past. The children from the shopping centers, the little hippie, or even the lady bartender. The young man in the back of the car was one she might have dated had things just been a little different. A little different. The girl might have been like her a couple years ago, so she was like relating to these people. These were bright kids, these were college students. Even the giant in the parking lot had been not stupid, even, despite his size and his actions. She watched him in the rear vision mirror as she drove away, saw him staring at the license plate. Beside her, Jerry exposed the little gun and was pointing it at the couple in the back seat. The gorgeous girl in the blue silk dress and the handsome young man in the blue suit. Maybe she could talk Jerry out of it. Maybe, just maybe. If they stopped the car a block or two away from the shop and, told those two kids to get out, it was all a joke. The incident will be written off as a prank and they would be safe again for a while. And she would never, ever see Jerry again. Never, never, never. But Jerry had to know what he was doing and how dangerous this was. He had to know. He saw our license number, she told Jerry. I'm sure that big guy in the parking lot saw our license number. And I can't believe he didn't see the gun, Jerry. Shut up and drive, Jerry replied. So she drove and talked while she drove. That guy was looking. He was looking back. He must have seen the driver's license number, Jerry. What she meant was the license plate, but her outward composure slipped just that much. She said Jerry's driver's license instead. Shut up and drive, Jerry repeated. Where do you want me to go? She asked. Well, just get on out of here and get back out to the freeway, he ordered. So she drove on out Arden Way to Alta Arden and then on Owen Avenue toward the freeway. And she found an on-ramp and turned east on US 50 in the Sunrise area, where the highway begins to rise in the wind through the gentle hills on its way to the Sierra Nevada. Sierra Nevada. But Jerry had other things on his mind. He was drunk and he was mean, so he was always mean. But Craig Miller answered when Jerry asked, how much money do you have? But Charlene couldn't quite hear the reply, so she would remember something with a 2 in it, not very much, like $12, maybe, perhaps like 20. Jerry told Miller to give him his wallet, and then he turned to the girl. What are you doing with a bum like this? He asked. The girl answered, but Charlene could never remember the answer. She kept thinking about the big kid in the parking lot. He must have seen the license, she said again. And Jerry, I can't believe it, he must have seen the gun. Jerry, ignore her. The road swung south, a long sweeping curve rising sharply, then east again towards this little slope. A small highway sign indicated that they were approaching past Lake Road. And that's so funny. I know that spot too. That's usually like a landmark for me. I guess it's called I don't know if it's a landmark. What's like when you're driving somewhere and you're almost somewhere when you see like this certain spot along your route. You know what I mean? So every time I go camping up 50, every time I see that, I know we're almost to the campgrounds. So it's kind of funny. Weird. Creepy. Now every time I go camping, I'm going to be thinking about the fact that they were driving that same road. Oh, that just gave me the creeps. So, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know. This guy, he saw the license plate. It's sketchy, So, Jerry had these other things on his mind. He didn't care about this big guy, you know what I mean? So Jerry ordered her, turn off here. Charlene obeyed and followed the off-ramp into a road which dead-ended at a farmhouse. Jerry snarled and ordered her to turn around and go the other way. So she drove back beneath the freeway under an overpass to a graveled road, which twisted through the foothills. Slow, Jerry warned, go slow. That was the tip-off. Jerry always became acutely conscious of the traffic laws when something bad was going to happen. The nightmare was back all over again, and Charlene was watching from a distant window in another world. stood over him and pointed the gun at the college student's head carefully and fired 2 more shots at him. Then he climbed into the back of the Cutlass beside the girl and told Charlene to get going. "Where will I go?" she inquired. "To my house. Back to my house," he ordered. Charlene obeyed the orders. A part of her watched from that seat in the distant galaxy where the rest drove the Cutlass back to the Highway 50, down through the gentle curves, out of the foothills, and back to the North Sac apartment that Jerry was living in at the time. So, she was just thinking about all the other deaths that he had, made happen, and it was starting to really freak her out after that. She was so creeped out. So, at the moment, she started to kind of hate the girl in the back who was wearing this shimmery blue party dress, who was sitting with Jerry. At the moment, he had his hands around the girl, loving her, going in her ear. "Do you want to be my Sally Joe tonight? How would you like to be my Sally Joe?" Jerry would take her before the night was over, and he would take her just as sure as the sun would rise in the morning. All that could stop him right now would be a posse of powerful policemen. When he was through with her, she would die. It had happened again. As long as he was alive and free, it would happen again. Charlene knew all that as well as she knew the first 5 words to the Star-Spangled Banner. But Charlene never called the police, and she thought about that. There wasn't much to think about. The time for calling the police had long since passed in her mind. She drove on toward Jerry's apartment and Mary Beth Sauer's appointment with eternity. Now, I'm going to stop for a moment and get some water, and then we'll be going towards chapter. Now we're going to Andy Beale. That is the 6'4" guy, the big guy, who knew that something just wasn't right and was looking at the license plate number. So his first impulse was to jump in his own car and follow them, but he was kind of thinking, he hesitated. He goes, "Well, I don't know, maybe it's this guy that Greg knows," but he had this feeling that they were being held against their will. So he thought, he thought about his date, and he didn't want to ditch her, so, he wasn't sure, but it didn't look like this was an old friend. Maybe Andy would have piled into his car and chased the Cutlass fruitlessly in a Volkswagen Bug. Fate intervened in the form of a fraternity brother and then the president of Delta Sigma Chi. The 3 young men held a hurried conference. They decided unanimously that Andy acted properly. He should not have chased Greg, nor should he have called the police. So that was what all of his frat brothers were saying. "You can't tell these days," the brother said to Andy. "We might just embarrass Greg if we call the cops and maybe get him in trouble. Anything's possible, even with Greg." If there was an all-American couple on the campus, it was Greg Miller and Mary Beth Sauers. She was the girl with, everything. She had the looks, she had figure, she had brains, all of that. Very talented. In numerous areas, she was very talented. So she was going to be this business admin major. It looked like before she graduated, she was going to be an admin in the firm where she held a full-time job while still carrying 16 units at Sacramento State University. She was an athlete, a seamstress, 100% feminine, talented, and beautiful day and night. Wake her up at 3 in the morning and she looks just like she did at 3 in the afternoon, her sorority sisters reported. Greg, her fiance, was equally self-assured, personable, handsome, and gifted, so he too had a bright future waiting for him, and the couple was looking forward to a December wedding. And, for all of that, Andy Beale knew a person could never be sure about anyone. Even an all-American couple could step over to the other side of the law, now and then, to snort some cocaine or smoke some marijuana. Andy Beale and his girlfriend went to a pizza parlor, drank a couple beers, then adjourned to her apartment. He left about 1:30, still uneasy. The picture of Greg's grim face in that backseat carousel. So he got out and he looked it over, and her coat was still lying on the seat, and a flower from her corsage, this carnation, was like lying on the floor of her car. And there was also this little clutch. So for a while, Andy thought again about calling the police, then feeling a little foolish, so he just went home instead. He went to bed about 3 a.m. and awoke about 5, and the uneasiness was still with him. He drove back to Arden Fair and found Mary Beth's car still in the parking lot. So this time there was no doubt in his mind. A police patrol car cruised through the parking lot, and Andy flagged that guy down and told his story. So the policeman, he just listened politely and, with some concern. And when Andy had finished, the officer asked him if that was all that happened, and he said it was. "We have to wait," the officer said. "He's a big boy, and she's a grown-up young woman. People have to be gone for a while before a missing persons report can be filed." And he asked exactly how long he had to wait. He was told the normal amount of time was 24 hours. There were exceptions if the person did not show up at a place where he or she was expected. Back at home, Andy called his fraternity brothers. He told them that Mary Beth's car was still there in the carousel lot, with her wrap still lying on the front seat, and they shared his concern. So Andy called Mary Beth's apartment, and her roommates reported she had not come home yet either. So he called Greg, Miller's mother, and she told him that he wasn't there as well. Deeply concerned, Andy waited until 10 a.m., then called Miller's employer. He was told that Greg was an hour late for work and had not called in. Miller would not fail to call in case of an emergency, and Andy was well aware that it would take an extreme emergency to keep him away from his job. So he went to the police headquarters and he announced that he wanted to file this missing persons report. Detective Lee Taylor of the Missing Persons Detail listened to Beale's story. He was impressed. This oversized, amiable kid was deeply concerned. He seemed to feel that in some way he should have done something when he saw that Greg and Mary Beth in the back seat of that Cutlass. The detective looked at the youngster's bulk and wondered if he would have been successful. There was, he decided, cause for concern. More concern than he believed an overworked missing persons detail could handle. The detective called Lieutenant Hal Taylor of the homicide assault detail and reviewed Miller's story with him. In a few moments, Beale and Detective Taylor were joined by Jean Burkett in homicide assault detail. So Burkett didn't look like a homicide detective to Andy. He didn't even look like a policeman. Young, red-haired, blue-eyed. Me. This guy just looked like this basic young kid, but he was wearing this blue-gray suit, and he looked more like this candidate for a part in a television series, it says. Like an old millionaire, stockbroker, or an attorney. Anything except Columbo. That's funny. I used to love that show when I was little. He sat in a chair beside Andy and said, "Let's go over this one step at a time." Now on to chapter 4. Pop, pop, pop. Charlene heard the shots in the distance and knew it was over. 3 shots in the early dawn as heavy trucks lumbered past through the fading darkness towards Sierra Nevada and I-80. So 3 shots were fired, and she had just lost her life so quickly. So this girl had lost everything in a matter of 6 hours. So one part of Charlene listened in that distant world where she lived when these things happened. Another waited in angry, frightened, submissive silence in the Cutlass. Charlene was frightened. Jerry had been careless this time. He had been foolish, and there would be a price to pay. Even before Mary Beth's life had ebbed away in that drainage ditch a few hundred feet from I-80 near Sierra College. That just gave me the chills. I know where that is. I know. It's literally right next to Sierra College. It's Sierra College Boulevard. Anyway. Oh, crazy. Around this time, that area is very, built around, there's a lot of shops and stores and restaurants and houses and stuff, but back was mostly just like fields and stuff. Charlene was super upset. She was like, God, this is it. We're done. Like, that's it. Everything she had thought would transpire had happened. Charlene had driven Jerry to the dingy apartment building where he was currently living, and he had taken Mary Beth inside at gunpoint. At Jerry's orders, Charlene had stretched out on the couch in the living room while he took the girl into the bedroom. For a while she listened. From that strange, distant world where she watched these things, she could see the fear on Mary Beth's face, the terror in her eyes when she walked into the building. Lying there on the couch in the front room, she could hear the girl argue and plead with Jerry. There was a lot of arguing and then sounds that, she expected to hear. And Charlene, she didn't hear all of it. She actually dozed off. She fell asleep. So for several hours she napped intermittently and awakened, realized Jerry and the girl were still there, and then would doze back off. Something terrible beyond belief was happening in the next room, but Charlene slept. The girl in the distant galaxy who watched these things knew Jerry for what he was and loathed him. The girl on the couch slept to escape her feelings. She was angry and frightened and outraged. Jerry had shot that boy right in front of her, and now he was in the bedroom with the girl, forcing her to do all the things that he enjoyed, everything that he demanded of her. Charlene awoke, worried. Daylight was on the way, and Jerry was still in the bedroom with the girl. He emerged with Mary Beth in front of him at gunpoint while she was wondering what to do. It's almost daylight, he said. We have to get going. Obediently, Charlene followed them out and sat beside the driver's seat in the Oldsmobile. Jerry sat beside her, watching the girl in the back seat, his little gun ready. Keep your head down, he ordered. Mary Beth obeyed. Charlene put the girl in the distant galaxy, and the one sitting in the cutlass beside Jerry could see the signs of strain and terror and fear in the girl's face. Mary Beth cried quietly, and they were these little subdued sobs. Jerry told her to drive and go towards I-80, the freeway north side of Sacramento, which climbs the Sierra Nevada over Donner Summit and drops down into Truckee and follows a twisting route to Reno and points east. She drove through the back streets, protesting all the time that they had better be careful. She kept telling Jerry that the kid in the parking lot at Arden Fair had seen their license plate. And so she was really stuck on that. And Jerry wasn't listening. His eyes were bloodshot and he reeked of alcohol. Charlene found a freeway on-ramp and turned east on I-80. Where are we going? She asked. Just drive, he said. I'll tell you where to go. It's getting daylight, Jerry, Charlene protested. Gallego watched the road until they reached open country. Then he told Charlene to take an off-ramp. They crossed a railroad jack and drove into a residential court of some kind. Drive back to the freeway, Jerry ordered. Charlene followed orders. The fear which had been with her since he had encountered the young giant in the Arden Fair parking lot was growing, however. I'm sorry, I'm really dealing with insane allergies right now. So Arden Fair parking lot was growing. The sky was turning from black to gray over the mountains, and soon the sun would rise and they would be more vulnerable than ever. So Jerry saw another off-ramp and told her to take it. She did. He ordered her right back onto I-80, and Charlene could see the girl in the back seat, and she was still sobbing, but by then she was sure Mary Beth knew what was going to happen. But there was no way to stop Jerry. Whether Charlene wanted to stop him or not was unimportant. He had a gun, and she knew he would kill anyone who interfered with his plans. Finally, Charlene took the car off the highway near Sierra College again. So, like I was saying, she drove into another dead-end street, and Jerry was snarling when he told her to turn the car around. A different kind of fear gripped Charlene for a moment. Jerry had killed a lot of girls. Why not her? He needed her. houses nearby, but only one was close, a large white residence which was off at an angle from the road. Jerry told Charlene to drive a short distance further and then stop. He ordered Mary Beth out of the car, and the two of them walked away, the girl in front, Gallego behind with the gun in his hand. And a diesel truck roared past, and the wind rustled through the leaves of a nearby live oak. Charlene noticed Mary Beth was stumbling a little as she walked over the rough ground. She could see lights shining from the windows of houses in the distance. People were rising early on the weekend, to play, hike, whatever. So people were going fishing, there were enough little, snow patches up in that area. People were probably going to go outside, have breakfast, whatever. They were people who were alive, Charlene thought. She also wanted to get out of there as well, but that big inn in the parking lot had seen their license plate, and the police were probably searching for them now, so she's really freaking out. Jerry and the girl were more than 100 feet away by then. Charlene saw them walk up a little slope and disappear into some kind of depression, and then she heard it. Pop, pop, pop. It was over, and Jerry would come back through the brightening morning, and they could get out of there. To what? She didn't know. She was thinking about the kid in the parking lot who had been there and, had seen her license plate, Andy. She wasn't thinking about the girl. The girl was dead. There was nothing she could be doing, for the girl. There's nothing she could do. So Jerry walked alone through the gathering light towards the Cutlass and climbed into the passenger seat beside her. We've got to go back to the apartment. We've got things we have to do, he said. Charlene continued to protest. That guy, she said, that guy, back at the carousel. He saw the license number. I'm sure he must have seen the gun. He took over the wheel and drove back to the apartment, ordering her to change the bed and clean everything Mary Beth had touched. Wow, so he's ordering her to clean up his rape mess. It's wild. It's so gross that she actually does it. So he took over the wheel and drove back, like I was saying, and she started to clean all this stuff up when they got back. And they took a nap, and then they resumed back to their chores. So now we're on to chapter 5. A solitary turkey buzzard rocked and tilted precariously on a moist updraft above the Sierra Nevada foothills, threatening, despite its 6-foot wingspread, to slip off the unstable air current and plunge headlong into hillsides still dyed golden brown by the long, dry summer which had given way a damp November. A green carpet was struggling up between last year's dead cover. The buzzard tilted and turned on funeral wings of two-tone black, tightening its uncertain circle as it focused beadly telescopic eyes in a bare, reptilian head on the body beside Bass Lake Road. It dropped from current to current, descending down a vast, invisible staircase, drawing closer and closer to the motionless figure on the grassy shoulder of Bass Road Lake. Up the hill and across the highway, the family in the farmhouse beside the end of the road awakened. A man emerged from the house and took care of some minor chores, then returned just in time to sit down for breakfast. And heard some shooting last night. He told his wife, "Did you notice anything?" His wife nodded. "Some of those damn deer hunters don't care a hoot about the law," the farmer complained. "Can't wait until sunup to shoot, and maybe I'll be lucky if I don't find a dead steer out in one of the pastures." There was some buzzards gathering on the other side of the highway, so some people just don't have good sense. His wife agreed as she dished up breakfast and joined him. 3 shots, the farmer said. Just 3 shots. I don't know what it was, but give a fool a gun and he's liable to shoot anything. What do they think they're doing out there in the dark anyway? Thank the Lord it's the last day of the hunting season. Back on Bass Lake Road, a pickup truck carrying a pair of hunters, their guns racked and coiled in the back of the cab, rolled toward the refreshment stand at the lake, hoping for a cup of coffee before their hunt started. The road was bumpy and uneven, and one of the hunters caught sight of a dark bundle at the side of the road as the pickup passed. "I thought I saw something back there," he told the driver. "It could have been a bundle of clothes or a man. He could have been hurt if he was just lying there. Probably some bum just sleeping off a bottle of fast over these bumps and ruts. The hunters drank their coffee as the morning warmed, and the buzzard was joined by fellow vultures, beady eyes and scaly, bare redheads, intent on the figure beside Bass Lake Road. Hours passed. The hunter roamed leglessly through the hills. The farmer watched the buzzards and wondered about the attraction. A man and a boy walked along the road, idling and enjoying the morning. Back in Sacramento, Andy Bill had laid out a story for Detective Gene Burkett. The investigator was running a check on the driver's license number of the Olds with the California Division of Motor Vehicles. So the car was reported, the car report was revealed, actually, and was legal property of a prosperous business executive. The registered owner was his daughter. So Burkett prepared to visit the car's legal owner. His daughter, he understood, lived with him beside Bass Lake Road in the morning, continuing to warm. At 11:30, the man and the boy passed the point in the road where Greg Miller was laying on the shoulder. Overhead, the buzzard circled patiently. The boy found the body and called his father. "Something's wrong," he reported. "Something's terribly wrong." The man joined the boy and examined Greg Miller's body. He trembled a little and drew the boy away. "Come on," he said. "We gotta get a telephone." Overhead, the buzzard waited, still patient, while an El Dorado County Sheriff's Department car rolled down the hill. They circled and swooped, colliding comfortably on the updrafts. So they're trying to go up, and then now this other car arrives. So not until Detective Sergeant Bill Wilson ordered the body removed to an ambulance did the airborne gallery break up. Wilson reflected on what he had found. It was a strange murder, almost an execution. So the young man had been shot 3 times in the back of the head. His wallet was missing. Robbery would have been the motive, but the boy still had his wristwatch, although his shoes were missing, so they thought that was weird. And Charlene thought that was weird, that he wanted the shoes off. But Sergeant Wilson reflected that the crime scene was not entirely without physical evidence. The little .25 automatic which had killed Greg Miller had ejected 3 shell casings when it was used for the murder. They were lying bright and shiny on the grassy shoulder, waiting to be collected as evidence after they had been properly photographed by the technicians summoned to Bass Lake Road for that purpose. The sergeant worked several hours on the crime scene. He checked the young man's description with his dispatcher. Eventually, Detective Gene Burkett was called in Sacramento. "Your missing person is up here," he was told. "The young man has been murdered." Now this is our last chapter of this book. It's chapter 6. Chapter 6. Chapter 6. One day, she had planned to spend one day with Gerald Armand Gallego, her husband, as far as she knew, and it had started all over again. One day, less than 24 hours, and now 8 murders were 10. By then, of course, Charlene was familiar with murder. If she was concerned with the deaths of Greg Miller and many Mary Beth Sowers, there were by no means the most important of her worries. Survival was the prime issue for her. So living and not getting caught. 8 people had been killed, and the police had never been close to them except for that Trujillo man in Yolo County, and she had been able to take care of him. But this time it was different. Now there was that big guy she had slapped. The one she was sure had seen her license number and probably the gun. So she can't stop thinking about this guy. Charlene wasn't stupid. If the police had the license number of the Oldsmobile, they would put 2 and 2 together, and any first grader could come up with the right answer. The police would get on the trail of both her and Gerald, and all of the murders would be discovered. Charlene started thinking about the fact that they could end up in San Quentin prison in the death chamber, death chamber. And she just starts shuddering at this thought. And even then, she slept. She reposed on the bed in the back room of Jerry was insatiable. Neither Charlene nor Jerry slept long. Jerry was very professional at times like these. He was proud of his knowledge of the police and what they thought and would do or say or try, and he was always ready for them. At least that's what he thought. At Jerry's orders, she scrubbed and cleaned every place Mary Beth had touched. Every stick of furniture, a door, or, piece of woodwork or countertop. There was some talk about Mary Beth's purse. It was full of pencils and pens. Charlene could not understand why one girl going to a dance had carried, so many pencils and pens. Jerry said they had to dispose of everything they could possibly connect them to the young man and woman that they had just murdered. Pens, pencils, purse, the gun, most of all the gun, the little 25 caliber automatic which had killed 2 people so recently and which would never kill again, not unless Jerry was trapped or decided to kill her. So she could never be sure. But she had been so a part of these murders, so she kind of thought that she had this one-up. Charlene was a bright young woman and an exceptionally intelligent human being. As a child, she had been placed in special classes for mentally gifted children. She knew Jerry had no reason to kill her. She, of all people, could not afford to talk. Whether or not Jerry knew was a whole nother matter. She hoped he did. This time Jerry was different. Some kind of arrogance. His indifference was gone. She was reminded of those days when she first met him, when he had been so polite and attentive. The slaps, the punches, the elbows, and the ribs came later. He was now the old Jerry again. He was clinging to her, even when he gave orders. Not for a minute would he let her out of his sight. He kept her close, really, really close. Jerry decided they would take the things which belonged to Mary Beth and the gun and everything else which had not already been thrown into the dumpster and dispose of them in the Sacramento River at Miller Park. They drove to the park, and he stayed close. He wouldn't let her go. Even when they reached the park and were walking out to the little marina, he wouldn't let go. He held her hand and told her over and over again how much he loved her, and he wasn't going to let anything happen to her. He didn't want to let go, not even for a fragment of a second. The park was familiar to Charlene. She had been there before, on some kind of sailing boat or something. So they walked out to this marina hand in hand because Jerry, he was still clinging on for dear life. And when Jerry thought it was safe, they threw everything into the murky water, and then they drove back to the apartment. Jerry left her for a moment on the return trip. He stopped at the corner of Howe and El Camino near the farmer's market and went into a place that made donuts. He left her, but he wasn't really gone. He was watching her all the time on the way through the door and through the window while he ordered some pastry snails. She knew then that he wouldn't dare let her get away, couldn't bear letting her getting out of his sight. They took all of the sheets off the bed when they returned to the apartment and got all their laundry together and started to wash everything at her mother's place. So as she put her laundry in the rear of the Oldsmobile, Charlene saw shoes. The black dress loafers that Jerry had made Craig remove before he murdered him. They were in a brown paper bag and protruding just a little bit. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. At El Camino and Eastern, Jerry told her to stop and get rid of the shoes in a dumpster. Oh my god, that's so crazy. I used to work at a dental office on Eastern in Marconi. Wow. Crazy. So, sorry, that's just nuts. So, Charlene thought about the warrant in Butte County. After all she had seen at 10 murders by then, she thought about the sex charge in Butte County. Jerry was wanted on a charge of molesting his daughter. A warrant for his arrest had been issued in Butte County, so Charlene thought about the warrant. She remembered a statutory rape charge in Butte County and forgot about the murders, even in the past 24 hours. There was never an opportunity to know if Jerry remembered the murders. He put the laundry bag down and turned to her and said, "Just don't tell them anything. Just don't do anything. Just don't say anything and keep your mouth shut." And Jerry was gone. He was long gone. So the detectives show up to the mom's house, and he says, this is, the mother introduces him, this is Detective Burkett. She's from the Sacramento Police Department. Detective Burkett was polite and soft-spoken, but he was also suspicious. She was confused and frightened. There was another detective in the room. His name, her mother told her, was Detective Lee Taylor from the Missing Persons Detail. Charlene thought Detective Burkett was politely antagonistic. The detective named Taylor was a lot kinder. She remembered how Jerry had warned her that if the cops ever questioned them, they would play this cat and mouse game with her. There'd be like this good cop, bad cop situation going on. They'll try to trap you. He warned, one of them will be your friend and the other will be real suspicious. That way, they'll figure you might talk to your friend. Watch out for them. They'll trap you if they can. She sat down and lied. She told the detective she had been to a motion picture that night. Mary Beth and Greg were murdered, and she had spent the night with Jerry in his apartment. She had not been driving the silver blue Oldsmobile. Lies. And that they had not been married, she said. Instead, they had been riding in a red Triumph, which belonged to Jerry. The telephone rang, and Charlene's mother said the call was for her. "Is it my grandmother?" Charlene asked in this honest innocence. Her mother, standing in the kitchen where she had taken the call, motioned to the telephone. Jerry was on the other end of this line. And she kept her voice low, and the detectives didn't hear what she was saying. When Detective Burkett and Taylor finished their questions and left, Charlene's parents began asking these questions. Her replies were angry and defensive. "I don't know what the fuck everybody is talking about," she said. The words lit a fuse for her father. That would piss my dad off if I used that word. Oh, he would go nuts. So his dad was pissed. Her dad was pissed. Not knowing murder was involved, and certainly not that his daughter was implicated, her language was important to him. The argument ended when Jerry called, and with more humility than normal, he asked her to meet him at an ice cream store not far away. On her way to pick up Jerry, Charlene saw Detective Burkett walking through the neighborhood not far from El Camino and Marconi. The dumpster where she had thrown Greg Miller's shoes was located there. She thought about that. But Burkett had a two-way radio in his hand and seemed to be kind of just looking around for anything that he could find. There was always this possibility that he would look in the dumpster and find Miller's shoes. Burkett looked smart. She told herself the detective didn't even know there was a murder yet, but his card had said he was a murder of the homicide assault detail. The thought occurred to her that he could mean trouble. By the time she picked up Jerry, he was obsessed. "We've got to go back up the hills," he said. "We've got to go move the guy." They meant Greg Miller, so he said, "Where is he?" Because he couldn't remember. And Charlene told him where he had killed him. About, what happened, 3 shots. And he said, "Where is he?" Once again, Charlene pinpointed the exact location where he was. And Jerry insisted they return to the road and move the body. But by this time, he was already discovered, so "We'll need to get gas," Charlene said. She drove to her service station at the corner of Fair Oaks and Watt Avenue and filled the tank of the Oldsmobile. Yep, I know where that is too. While she was buying gas, Charlene went and met a woman who had taught one of her English classes at Rio Americano High School. Charlene couldn't remember her name, only that she taught English and home economics, that she and Charlene shared the same birthday, and that they had both played the violin. Charlene remembered, a flightly, bubbly person. She chatted with the woman and told her she was glad she had not changed, thinking she would never know how glad she was she had not changed. They drove back across town to Highway 50 and back into the foothills where she remembered Greg Miller's body was, off of Bass Lake Road. The roadside was empty, and there had been tons of feet marks and stuff. There were like tire tracks and cigarette butts, and a couple of cigars had been, put out on the pavement. No one was there, and Jerry was like, "Well, where is he?" And he's like, "You must be at the wrong place. Like, this is not it. Like, he can't just be gone." But he definitely was. And Shirley told him, like, this is the exact spot where we did, like, where it happened. And the truth was, like, dawning on her, like, oh my god, they found him. We're done. We're done. We're done. And, of course, she's doing this whole living in 2 bodies situation again. It was right there, she said, right there. This is the place. But there was no body. And Jerry was angry. She was irritated. They kept just going back and forth. So he finally said, like, we've got the wrong place. We're looking for some friends, because there was this guy that like came up and like started asking, like, are you guys lost? So through the afternoon, the grisly search continued while Jerry kept insisting that Charlene take him to the place where Craig Miller's body was lying. And Charlene turned over and over to this same bumpy country road. And he said, you know, think back, he ordered. But he doesn't hear me, Charlene thought. So they drove across some other developments, and she kind of wondered, like, how could she deal with, like, the police asking questions, if they ever did, about this even more. So the afternoon passed while they drove the Oldsmobile back to Bass Lake, and then again, well, you know, he insisted, this is the wrong place, we gotta go somewhere else. So she goes, fine, we better call my mom, because we're gonna be late to dinner. So she eventually calls her mom and lets her know. So they go back to the apartment, and they get all the guns and everything out, all the bullets, so nothing can be, like, linked back to their apartment. And basically they just continue with Charlene following his orders and drive back to the mountains. So they stop at this, like, shopping center, and he went into this market and got this, like, large paper bag, and then came back. He had this, like, light beige blanket, and she asked him what was the blanket for, and he was like, it's for the guy. And she's like, dude, he's not there. Dude, we've done this, we've gone over this numerous times. He's not there. So it's like, whatever. This guy, he truly thinks that he's there, but whatever. And he goes, what do you want to do? Jerry asked her. I'll go away for a little while, and then I'll come back to get you. Or do you want to go away? What do you want to do? I was totally wrong. There is another chapter. There's chapter 7 here, which is like 1, 2, literally 2 pages. So Charlene was frightened. Deep inside, something told her it was over. All the murders, all the killing. The big guy in the parking lot had seen the license number, given it to the cops. That was it. What was next? The gas chamber. What was going to happen? So these last 2 victims that were taken, there was something special about these last 2. She could feel it. Charlene turned to Gallego. I'm going to call my mom and dad before I go, she said. Gerald was the way he had been earlier in the day. He was tender and affectionate and, like, clinging to her. He agreed that she should talk to her parents, and basically they meet up with Charlene's parents at this bar in this back booth. And Charlene's parents are just like, what's going on? Like, what are you guys all mixed up in? And they're like, whatever you're thinking, you're wrong. Like, but we have to leave. So she's like, the only thing I can do is go away for a while, Mom and Dad. And they're like, they're going to end up getting the right people that they're after, and all of this will blow over. But Charlene's father was not very enthusiastic about all this. He told him there was no reason to leave town, but eventually all 4 of them agreed, like, fine. Reluctantly, she just ended up leaving. So the Oldsmobile headed over the Sierra Nevada on Highway 50 past Lake Tahoe and over Spooner's Summit to Carson City, and then up Washoe Valley to Reno. They stopped in Reno and left the Cutlass in the parking lot of the Circus Casino, and they were, like, on the run as far as they could go with that car, is like how far they went. So by then they had seen the newspapers and knew